Most love stories start with a magical moment, eyes meeting across a crowded room, a chance encounter in a coffee shop, or perhaps a dramatic rescue in the rain. Mine started in a sandbox when I was 5 years old. Sometimes I wonder if that's where things went wrong, believing in a fairy tale that began too early. I still remember that crisp September morning in our small coastal town of Pacific Grove, California. The salty breeze carried the scent of the ocean, mixing with the sweet aroma of my mother's freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. I was sitting in our front yard watching the moving truck pull up to the house next door. That's when I first saw Lucas Chin, a skinny boy with unruly black hair and the brightest smile I'd ever seen. He was clutching a worn teddy bear in one hand and his mother's skirt with the other, looking simultaneously excited and terrified about their new home. I remember thinking he looked like one of those characters from my favorite cartoons, all big eyes and nervous energy, when his mother gently pushed him toward our yard, where I sat with my tea set arranged perfectly on a pink plastic table. Neither of us knew we were about to begin a story that would span decades. "Hi, I'm Lucas," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I like your tea set." "I'm Sarah," I replied, pouring imaginary tea into a tiny cup. "Want to join my tea party?" From that moment on, we were inseparable. Our parents would joke that they never had to wonder where either of us was. If Lucas wasn't at our house, I was at his. We shared everything: toys, secrets, dreams, and eventually our first awkward kiss behind the big oak tree in his backyard when we were 13. Growing up, everyone in Pacific Grove knew us as Lucas and Sarah. We were that couple, the one people pointed to as proof that true love exists. Even our teachers would smile knowingly when they saw us together in the hallways of Pacific Grove High. We did everything together, joined the same clubs, took the same classes, applied to the same colleges. By the time senior year rolled around, no one was surprised when Lucas proposed at our graduation party. I can still feel the weight of that moment. The humid June air, the fairy lights strung across his parents' backyard, and the way his hands trembled as he got down on one knee. The ring was simple, a small diamond his grandmother had given him. But to me, it was perfect. "Sarah Martinez," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We've been writing our story since we were 5 years old. Will you keep writing it with me forever?" The tears were already flowing as I nodded yes. The cheers from our families and friends blended with the sound of waves crashing against the nearby shore. In that moment, everything felt right. Perfect. Destined. Our parents, bless their hearts, helped us find a small apartment near California State University, Monterey Bay, where we'd both enrolled. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom unit with a tiny kitchen and a view of the parking lot, but it was ours. I remember the day we moved in, how Lucas carried me across the threshold like we were already married, both of us laughing as he nearly tripped over a moving box. Those early days were a blend of classes, part-time jobs, and building our life together. We'd spend evenings studying at our secondhand dining table, sharing cups of instant ramen and dreams about our future. Lucas would make me laugh until my sides hurt, acting out scenes from our textbooks or making up silly songs about molecular biology. One day, he'd say, pulling me close as we lay in bed, "We'll have a house with a white picket fence, 2 kids, James and Emily, and a golden retriever named Max." I'd curl into his warmth, breathing in the familiar scent of his soap and laundry detergent, believing every word. We had it all planned out: graduation, careers, marriage, kids. The American dream, tailored to fit our love story. We got married right after graduation, in a small ceremony on the beach where we'd spent countless summer days as teenagers. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit modern times, but carrying all the love and history of her own marriage. Lucas cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, and I remember thinking my heart would burst from happiness. The first 6 years of marriage were everything we dreamed of. We both found jobs in our fields. Me as a high school biology teacher, Lucas as a marketing executive for a tech startup. We moved into a bigger apartment, started saving for a house, and began seriously discussing starting our family. Every anniversary, we'd return to our beach, watch the sunset, and talk about how lucky we were to have found each other so young. On our sixth anniversary, over a bottle of wine and a picnic on the sand, we decided to start trying for a baby. I can still feel the excitement bubbling in my chest as we made plans, the way Lucas's eyes lit up when we talked about nursery colors and baby names. James for a boy, he said, tracing patterns in the sand. Emily for a girl, just like we always planned. I leaned against him, watching the waves crash against the shore, feeling completely at peace. How could I have known that in exactly 1 year, our perfect world would shatter into a million pieces? The 7th year of our marriage started normally enough. My mother got sick, nothing serious, but enough that I needed to help out more at home. I split my time between our apartment and my parents' house, trying to balance teaching, being a wife, and helping my mom through her recovery from minor surgery. I'd been planning something special for our 7th anniversary, a surprise weekend getaway to the bed and breakfast where we'd spent our honeymoon. I even left work early that day, picking up Lucas's favorite cake from the little bakery downtown. The spring air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine, and I remember feeling so excited about surprising him. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs. The late nights at work, the new passwords on his phone, the way he'd stopped sharing random thoughts and jokes throughout the day. But when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, they say all the red flags just look like flags. I'll never forget the moment I opened our bedroom door that afternoon. The cake box slipped from my hands, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through my entire body. There was my husband, my soulmate, my best friend since childhood, tangled in our marriage bed with someone else. The world tilted sideways. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my vision blurring at the edges. The woman, I would later learn, she was his new marketing assistant, scrambled to cover herself, but Lucas just sat there, his face drained of color, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Sarah," he started, his voice strangled. "It's not, I can explain." But there was nothing to explain. The scene before me said everything that needed to be said. 20 years of friendship, 7 years of marriage, countless dreams and promises, all lying shattered on our bedroom floor along with that anniversary cake. I don't remember much about the next few minutes. I know I threw up right there on our bedroom floor. I know I locked myself in the bathroom, my body shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone to call my best friend. Elena. I remember her voice, sharp with anger when she arrived, and the way she efficiently packed a bag for me, while shouting at Lucas to stay away. That night, curled up in Elena's guest room, I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching someone else's life fall apart. How could this be happening to us? We were Lucas and Sarah, the couple everyone believed in, the ones who proved that childhood sweethearts could make it work. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyer meetings, well-meaning friends bringing casseroles, and crying sessions that left me feeling hollow. Lucas's parents begged me to reconsider, to work things out. His mother, who had been like a second mom to me for 20 years, kept insisting it was just a mistake, that all marriages go through rough patches. But how do you rebuild trust that's been completely shattered? How do you look at the person who's been your whole world since childhood and see only a stranger? The next 2 years of my life felt like walking through thick fog. My parents insisted I see a therapist, Dr. Richards, who helped me understand that grief isn't just for death. It's also for the death of dreams, of trust, of the future you thought you'd have. I remember sitting in her office, surrounded by calming blue walls and the gentle burble of a small fountain, trying to make sense of my new reality. "Sarah," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm, You're not just grieving Lucas. You're grieving the girl you were with him, the life you planned, the story you thought you were living. She was right. Every morning, I'd wake up and for a split second forget. Then reality would crash over me like a cold wave, and I'd have to remember all over again that my life wasn't what I thought it would be. The divorce proceedings dragged on, each meeting a fresh reminder of how thoroughly my fairy tale had crumbled. Elena, bless her heart, tried to get me back into the dating world after the first year. You need to get back out there, she'd insist, scrolling through dating apps on my phone. Not everyone is Lucas, but every date felt like a pale imitation of what I'd had, or thought I'd had. I kept looking for his laugh, his mannerisms, the way he could light up a room. Every man I met was measured against the ghost of my first love, and unsurprisingly, they all fell short. I threw myself into my work instead, taking on extra classes at school and volunteering to coach the science club. My students became my focus, their dreams and aspirations a welcome distraction from my own shattered ones. It was during this time that Elena mentioned her colleague needed a biology tutor for his son, who was struggling with AP classes. His name is Marcus, she said, handing me a business card. He's an architect, divorced, no drama. Just a dad trying to help his kid pass biology. I almost said no. The last thing I wanted was to spend my evenings in another man's house, even if it was just for tutoring. But something about Elena's description intrigued me. No drama. After the emotional hurricane I'd been through, no drama sounded almost exotic. Marcus Williams wasn't anything like I expected. When I arrived at his modernist home, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, I found a tall, serious-looking man in wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms covered in architectural sketches. He didn't smile when he greeted me, just nodded, and led me to the kitchen where his son, Tommy, was already set up with his textbooks. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, his voice deep and measured. "Tommy's grade is concerning." That was it. No small talk, no attempt at charm, just straight to business. It was refreshing. Over the next few weeks, as I helped Tommy grasp the concepts of cellular respiration and genetic inheritance, I found myself becoming fascinated by Marcus's presence in his home. Unlike Lucas, who filled every space with words and energy, Marcus moved through his house like a quiet storm, purposeful, contained, but with an intensity that was hard to ignore. He always worked at his drafting table while Tommy and I studied, but I noticed how he'd pause occasionally to listen when I explained complex concepts, his pencil hovering over his drawings. Sometimes I'd catch him nodding slightly as I used architectural analogies to explain biological structures. One evening, after a particularly successful study session where Tommy finally mastered meiosis, Marcus surprised me by asking if I'd like to get coffee sometime. The way he asked, direct without pretense or flowery words, made my heart skip a beat. There was something almost comforting about his straightforwardness. Our first date was almost comically awkward. We sat in a small cafe, me nervously chattering about my teaching experiences, him responding with monosyllabic answers and occasional questions about my educational background. He didn't ask about my favorite movies or my hobbies. Instead, he wanted to know about my thoughts on the education system and my experiences with different learning styles. I was 100% certain he wouldn't call again, who would, after such a stilted evening. But 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Would you like to have dinner on Friday? I know a quiet place where we can talk more about your ideas on experiential learning." I almost laughed out loud. Who asks for a second date to discuss teaching methods? But something about his peculiar approach intrigued me. Here was someone who clearly wasn't trying to sweep me off my feet or recreate any romantic comedies. He was just interested in my thoughts, in my work, in me. The second date was slightly better. We went to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Marcus talked more this time, asking thoughtful questions about my classes and sharing his own views on education. I learned that his passion for architecture came from a deep desire to create spaces that could change people's lives. Every building tells a story, he said, his eyes lighting up for the first time. It's not just about walls and roofs. It's about creating spaces where life happens, where memories are made. It was the first time I saw a crack in his stoic facade, a glimpse of the passion that lay beneath his quiet exterior. As we continued dating, these glimpses became more frequent, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together to reveal a picture I never expected. Our sixth date was when everything changed. After dinner at his house, he cooked surprisingly well. One thing led to another, and we ended up in his bedroom. It was different from anything I'd experienced before. Not the passionate whirlwind I was used to with Lucas, but something deeper, more intentional. Every touch felt deliberate. Every moment weighted with presence. Afterward, lying in his bed, I mentioned being hungry, a habit I developed years ago. Without a word, Marcus got up, pulled on his clothes, and left the room. I lay there, confused and slightly hurt, wondering if I'd somehow ruined the moment. 20 minutes later, he returned with takeout containers of orange chicken, my favorite dish that I'd mentioned in passing on our third date. That was the moment I fell in love with Marcus Williams, not because of grand gestures or passionate declarations, but because he listened, he remembered, he acted. In that simple act of getting my favorite food, he showed me more love than all that "I love you" as I'd heard in my previous marriage. As I sat cross-legged on his bed, eating orange chicken at midnight, Marcus watched me with those intense eyes of his. "Is it what you wanted?" he asked quietly. I nodded, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak, because it was exactly what I wanted, not just the food, but this quiet, steady presence. This man who didn't fill the silence with empty words, but with thoughtful actions. Little did I know then that this was just the beginning of our story, a story that would teach me that real love isn't about fairy tales or destiny. It's about choice. It's about showing up day after day in the small moments that make up a life together. As our relationship deepened, I began to understand that Marcus's stoic nature wasn't just a personality trait. It was armor he'd built over years of trauma. The story of his past came out in pieces, like a puzzle slowly assembling itself in the quiet moments we shared. One night, as we sat on his balcony watching the stars, he told me about his parents. His voice, usually so steady and controlled, trembled slightly as he spoke about growing up in a house where love was as scarce as food on the table. "My father was a violent alcoholic," he said, his fingers tightening around his coffee mug. "My mother chose drugs over everything else. They weren't the kind of parents who attended school events or celebrated birthdays. They were the kind who'd disappear for days, leaving nothing but empty bottles and broken promises." The moon cast shadows across his face as he spoke about the day his father pushed him down the stairs when he was 8. I remember lying there, looking up at him, and realizing that I couldn't count on anyone but myself. His grandfather, his mother's father, became his sanctuary. A skilled carpenter and handyman, the old man taught Marcus everything he knew about tools, woodwork, and electrical repair. "He showed me that you could build something beautiful with your hands," Marcus said, a rare smile softening his features. That's when I knew I wanted to be an architect. But fate had more challenges in store. His parents' overdose when he was 15 left him orphaned, and his grandfather's death from a heart attack 2 years later left him truly alone. He spent his final year of high school in a homeless shelter, working odd jobs and studying by streetlight when the shelter's lights went out. It was a local pastor who finally threw him a lifeline, offering him a place to stay and helping him secure a scholarship to university. "That's when I learned that kindness exists," Marcus said. "But it took me years to believe I deserved it." As I listened to his story, so many things about him began to make sense. His difficulty with verbal expressions of love, his preference for actions over words, his intense focus on providing stability and security. He'd never had a model for healthy love, never learned how to express emotions safely. Our courtship lasted 3 years, each day bringing new revelations and deeper understanding. Marcus approached our relationship with the same careful attention he gave to his architectural projects, methodical, thoughtful, and with an eye for detail that never ceased to amaze me. When he proposed, it wasn't with flowery words or grand gestures. We were in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, me grading papers at the counter while he made pancakes. He placed a plate in front of me, and there, next to the syrup, was a simple ring. "I want to build a life with you," he said, his voice steady but his hands betraying his nervousness as they gripped the counter. "Not because I need you, but because I choose you. Every day." We married in a small ceremony, nothing like my first wedding on the beach. This time, it was in a beautiful old library Marcus had helped restore, surrounded by books, history, and the quiet strength that defined our love. Tommy, now in college, served as best man, his proud smile a testament to how far we'd all come. Marriage to Marcus was different from anything I'd known before. He didn't fill our home with constant chatter or grand romantic gestures, but his love was present in countless small ways. Coffee made exactly how I liked it waiting for me every morning. Post-it notes with architectural sketches of hearts left on my laptop, the way he'd quietly take over household chores when he noticed I was stressed with work. The first time I heard him say, "I love you," was on our wedding day, his voice barely a whisper, as we danced our first dance. The second time was when I told him I was pregnant with our daughter, Grace. The third and fourth times came with the births of our children. The fifth was on a Christmas evening, both of us slightly tipsy from wine and happiness. 5. I love you, in 15 years of marriage, might seem strange to some people. But Marcus showed his love in other ways. In the careful way he'd massage my swollen feet during pregnancy, in how he'd wake up without complaint for midnight food runs, in the gentle way he cradled our newborns, tears streaming down his face as he promised to protect them. Our love wasn't perfect, but it was real. Where Lucas had been all surface charm and easy words, Marcus was depth and substance. He might not have been able to make me laugh until I fell out of my chair, but he could make me feel seen, understood, and cherished in ways I never knew I needed. Recently, something shifted in our relationship. After reading some articles about childhood trauma and PTSD that I'd left strategically around the house, Marcus agreed to try therapy. It wasn't an easy decision for him. Trauma had taught him to keep his walls high and his emotions guarded. 2 sessions in, he came home one day and pulled me into a tight hug, something uncharacteristically spontaneous for him. As we stood in our kitchen, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, he began to cry. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry for being so cold all these years. I love you. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. I've spent so long burying these feelings, thinking they made me vulnerable. But you and our children, you make me strong." That night, we talked for hours. He opened up about his fears of being like his parents, about how showing emotion felt dangerous because he'd never seen it done in a healthy way. "But I want to be better," he said. "For you, for our kids, for myself." Since then, the "I love you" have become more frequent. They're still not daily occurrences, but each one feels precious because I know how much courage it takes for him to say those words. Our children have noticed the change too. Our daughter says he's getting soft in his old age, while our son just seems pleased to see his father more emotionally available. Looking back at my journey, from the fairy tale first love with Lucas to this deeper, more complex love with Marcus, I realized that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its greatest disappointments. If Lucas hadn't betrayed me, I might never have discovered what real love looks like. It's not always about grand gestures or constant verbal affirmations. Sometimes it's about choosing each other every day, about showing up in the quiet moments, about building something strong and lasting from the broken pieces of your past. Marcus taught me that love isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you build together, brick by brick, day by day. Like the buildings he designs, it needs a strong foundation, careful maintenance, and room to grow. As I sit here in our garden, watching Marcus teach our son how to build a treehouse, I can't help but marvel at how life unfolds in unexpected ways. The afternoon sun catches his silver streaked hair as he patiently explains the importance of proper foundation to our eager 12-year-old. Our daughter, now 15, sits nearby, rolling her eyes at her father's detailed explanations while secretly taking notes. She wants to be an architect too. I recently heard that Lucas is going through his third divorce. His mother, still bitter after all these years, continues to blame me for his downfall. She tells anyone who'll listen that if I had stayed, if I had tried harder to fix him, things would be different. Maybe she's right, things would be different. But different isn't always better. The irony isn't lost on me that the man everyone thought was my soulmate turned out to be a serial cheater, while the man who seemed completely wrong for me turned out to be exactly right. Life has a funny way of teaching us that our preconceptions about love are often just that, preconceptions. Marcus and I have been together for 18 years now, married for 15. Our love story isn't the kind you'd find in romance novels or see in movies. We don't have dramatic declarations of love or passionate arguments followed by even more passionate reconciliations. What we have is deeper, steadier, more real. Recently, our relationship entered a new phase. After Marcus started therapy, something began to shift in our dynamic. It was subtle at first, a lingering touch here, a spontaneous hug there. Then, one evening, as he sat reading on our worn leather couch, the one I've been trying to replace for years, but he won't let go because it's perfectly broken in, I felt overwhelmed with love for this quiet, strong man who had helped me rebuild my life. "I love you," I said, standing in front of him. He looked up, confused, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. "Okay," he replied, and for a moment, my heart sank. But later that night, he came to our bedroom with tears in his eyes, something I'd only seen 3 times before, at our wedding and at the births of our children. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly together, and opened up in a way he never had before. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When you said, 'I love you,' I didn't know how to respond. Growing up, those words were never said in my house. The only time I heard them was when my father was drunk, apologizing for something he'd done. They never meant safety or comfort. They meant pain was coming." He took a deep breath, his shoulders shaking slightly. "But with you, with our children, I feel love every day. I feel it in the way you leave coffee for me in the morning, in how you know exactly when I need space to work through something, in how you've created this warm, safe home I never had growing up. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes because I never thought I deserved this kind of happiness." That night marked a turning point in our relationship. Marcus began expressing his feelings more openly, not just with me, but with our children too. He started saying, "I love you" more frequently, though each time still feels special because I know the courage it takes him to say those words. Our love isn't perfect. No real love is. We still have our challenges. Marcus can still be too withdrawn sometimes, especially when work stress triggers his old insecurities. I still occasionally catch myself comparing our quiet life to the fairy tale. I thought I was living with Lucas, but we work through these moments together with patience and understanding. Last week, we had a family dinner where Marcus surprised everyone by giving a toast, something he'd never done before. He stood at the head of our table, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined, and spoke from his heart. "When I was young," he said, "I thought love was like the buildings I design, something that needed to be perfect, structured, and controlled. But this family has taught me that real love is more like a garden. It needs daily attention, it gets messy sometimes, and it doesn't always grow the way you expect. But if you nurture it patiently, it becomes more beautiful than anything you could have planned." Our daughter pretended to gag at the sentiment, while our son blushed and stared at his plate. But I saw the small smiles they tried to hide, the way they glanced at each other with pride in their father's growth. Looking back at my journey from my first love to my true love, I've learned some profound truths about love and life. First, soulmates aren't found, they're built. The idea that there's one perfect person out there who will complete you is a beautiful fantasy, but real love is about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Second, love isn't always loud. Sometimes the quietest gestures carry the most meaning. A silent hug when you're stressed, a favorite meal appearing just when you need it, someone remembering small details about you that you forgot yourself. These are the true declarations of love. Third, our past shapes us but doesn't define us. Marcus could have let his traumatic childhood make him cold and distant. Instead, he chose to break the cycle, to learn to love in his own way, to be the father he never had. Fourth, healing isn't linear. There are days when old wounds feel fresh, when past betrayals cast shadows over present joy. But with the right person beside you, even the hardest days become manageable. And finally, real love isn't about finding someone who meets all your expectations. It's about finding someone who helps you grow beyond them. As I write this, I can hear Marcus and the kids arguing playfully about the proper angle for the treehouse roof. Our daughter is insisting it needs to be exactly 45 degrees for optimal aesthetic appeal. She's definitely her father's child, while our son just wants it to be high enough to see the neighbor's pool. Marcus is patiently explaining the importance of balancing form and function, turning even this moment into a lesson about life and design. This is my love story, not the one I dreamed of as a little girl playing in a sandbox with my first love, but the one I needed, the one that taught me that reality can be better than any fairy tale, that true love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about building something real and lasting together. To those who are still searching for love or healing from past heartbreaks, I want to say this. Sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with fireworks. Sometimes they start with a quiet okay and grow into something more beautiful than you could have imagined. Life has a way of leading us exactly where we need to be, even when the path seems unclear. Trust the journey. Trust that your heart knows what it needs better than your mind knows what it wants. And most importantly, remember that love, real love, is worth waiting for.